And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Happy New Year! I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service in Alaska region, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Wednesday, the first day of 2025. And we start out with the Aviation Weather Outlook. This will be for Thursday into Friday. There are going to be a few weak troughs fronts coming up into the Gulf, up into the lower Bering, but a couple low pressure areas should stay primarily down North Pacific and just south of the Aleutians as we go through the next couple of days. The big weather player will actually be a strengthening area of high pressure over northwest Canada, just east of the Alcan border over the Yukon Territory. It'll have a central pressure just under 1050 millibars, but what that is going to do is keep VFR conditions prevalent across much of the mainland, but also there's going to be a little shot of Arctic air work its way from east to west as we go through Friday and Saturday, early Sunday. And already there's been some pretty cold temperatures even as of this New Year's Day morning. We've had a beautiful display of the aurora. We had quite a geomagnetic storm intensify overnight, so Alaska was in a perfect spot to see some really good aurora activity. And so we've had temperatures, though, in some of the normally cold spots down around 40 below zero, Fort Yukon and Tok Junction. And anyways, as we go through time, that cold air just going to be pushing eastward across the interior. For Thursday afternoon, we find IFR conditions out over the Bering, St. Matthew down through the Pribilof Islands, parts of the lower third of the Alaska Peninsula, especially on the North Pacific side. But again, with that cold high pressure in place, we have generally VFR conditions, clear to partly cloudy skies. And for Friday morning, more of the same. In fact, even some colder temperatures showing up here across areas of the east central interior, upper Copper River Basin. A number of spots, at least the normally cold spots, could be down around 40 below. Also, with that colder air advancing westward, there will be some stronger easterly winds through some of the gaps and valleys that are susceptible to that when the cold air is coming in there from the east. Out over the Bering, still areas of IFR, central Bering, and then also down, especially across areas of the Aleutians. And Friday afternoon, generally speaking, we have still a fair amount of VFR conditions on the mainland, though with a little bit of a trough coming northward and some moisture that will begin to increase from off of the North Pacific and Gulf. We're starting to see some MVFR conditions, eastern Kenai Coast, Kodiak Island, even some isolated IFR, and we still have IFR off of the southwest coast, just north of the Pribilofs there, between St. Paul, St. Matthew, and Nunavik Island, and then an area of IFR, eastern Aleutians extending to just north of the central and western Aleutians. So past conditions coming up for Thursday. VFR is going to be the rule across much of the state, at least of the passes we provide some weather information for. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, VFR there across the east central Brooks Range. As we come down across the Yukon Valley and then finally into the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Rainy Pass, VFR, as we round up through central Alaska Range, Windy Pass, VFR, and then eastward, Isabel Pass, VFR. Mentasta Pass could see a little MVFR conditions along the north entrance, but otherwise VFR. Across the Copper River Basin, cold and VFR with Tanita Pass, expecting VFR conditions Thursday, and Portage Pass, VFR conditions, as well as across the northern portion of the Panhandle. We expect VFR conditions at Chilkoot and White. Temperature-wise, we really don't have much in the way of any warm air aloft. The surface freezing line runs up through the central Bering, dips down here in the northern Alaska Peninsula along the Gulf Coast into the southwest Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft do bump upwards, isolated to 4,000 feet south of the Gulf there in the North Pacific, but nothing of note, not like we sometimes see with the stronger lows. Icing potential, minimal. South end of the Gulf, maybe the southern Panhandle above 6,000 feet. But there is more in the way of some moisture here, IFR conditions so above. Any precipitation producing clouds, or at least a little thicker cloud cover above 4,000 feet south of the eastern Aleutians and above 6,000 feet central western Aleutians. Upper level jet stream winds 30,000 feet. The jet core of 150 knots is actually working its way in toward Vancouver Island, and as we get down toward Washington State, there's also a band of stronger winds in the North Pacific well south of the Gulf, so no real notable wind field impacting Alaska, at least in the upper levels. Now at 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, generally an easterly flow across the Yukon Valley. This is what's going to help transport this little shot of Arctic air, cold air. I mean, as I said, some of the low temperatures will be down around 40 below, especially Friday, Saturday, even into Sunday morning, but that's going to quickly scoot westward. We have out over the Bering a broad area of winds in the mid-levels, 40 to as high as 55, 60 knots. And then at 3,000 feet, you can see where there's some stronger easterly winds here, coming down off the northwest slope here, the Alaska range, upwards of 55 knots or so out of the east, and then back out here across a broad area of the Bering, especially the lower Bering and Aleutians. We have easterly flow anywhere from 45 to 55 knots. We also have a little stronger winds that are going to try to creep up here just along the British Columbia coast, just south of the Panhandle. And so the turbulence, there could be a little bit of isolated moderate turbulence here. Dixon entrance south of Metlakatla and Craig surface to 6,000 feet. But with that easterly flow and that Arctic air going to be working its way westward, we find Yukon Valley, especially north of the Alaska range, and also a sliver here along the north slope just down the other side of the spine of the Brooks Range. Surface to 4,000 feet could be moderate turbulence. And then also during the day Thursday, as we trail out along the Alaska Peninsula, starting with Kodiak Island and up here in the northern portion of the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 4,000 feet, moderate turbulence. But then as we go further westward, there's even the potential for isolated severe turbulence on Thursday from the central back through the western Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet.